me. My name is Miss Lizzie. I don't ever smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some ditsies. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys. Miss Liz in the house. That's right, it's Friday, so guess what? It's a surprise tea time. That's how Miss Liz rolls. I just pop in and see if you guys are paying attention out there. So let's get started with you guys getting over to all those platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, all those good stuff. And let's give those a like, follow, and subscribe so we can get these tea times out there, because they do resonate with the listening audience out there, and they do help the guests that come to the table. Also, get over to the podcast apps: Podbean, Listen Notes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and all the ones that Miss Liz hasn't mentioned. Miss Liz is on all of those. There's just too many to mention. And jump over to babyboomers.org, because Miss Liz is partnered with them. And if you're looking for something that Miss Liz doesn't offer, you can always check out the 50 plus podcasts that are on babyboomers.org if you'd like to get featured on there as well. So let's get started with disclaimer and then a beautiful intro. And then we're going to get Shane Lukas in here. We're going to talk about a great ideal. That's what we're going to talk about today. And his T is trust, engagement, and empowerment. So we're going to talk about those three words as well. And we're going to talk about a bunch of other good stuff. So let's get started. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicating to sharing real life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I'm Miss Liz is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the giving time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own good judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of this discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com, or check out my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect your wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, welcome to Tea Time with Miss Liz, where conversations remind us that leadership is not only about achievements. It is about humanity, purpose, advocacy, and the impact we leave behind in the lives of others. Today's guest brings decades of experience at the intersection of leadership, creativity, empathy, and social impact. Please join me in welcoming Shane Lukas, founder and creator, strategist of A Great Ideal, an empathy-led creative agency that partnered with nonprofits, healthcare organizations, and purpose-driven brands to strengthen trust, deepen engagement, and turn values into action. For more than 20 years, Shane has worked in leadership, advocacy, creative strategy, and storytelling, helping organizations navigate change while staying grounded in connection, authenticity, and the people they serve. He is also a TEDx speaker, podcast host of Power Beyond Pride, and author of the upcoming book, The Advocacy Advantage, exploring how organizations can move beyond transactional relationships and build lasting, meaningful communities rooted in trust and advocacy. At the heart of Shane's work is a powerful belief. Strong organizations are not only well-run, they are human-centered, purpose-driven, and built with compassion. Today's tea time will explore leadership through empathy, advocacy and purposeful storytelling, human-centered organization culture, building trust and authentic connection, and turning values into meaningful action. Shane reminds us that real leadership is not about controlling people, it is about understanding them. So grab your cup and join us for a thoughtful and inspiring conversation filled with purpose, connection, and real life tea. Truth, experience, and awareness. Let me get Shane in here and let's spill some tea. Welcome, Shane.
Hey, Miss Liz, it's good to see you. It's wonderful. I got my cup here. I am ready.
I got my cup too. It's all ready to go.
It is like 1.5 billion degrees, so we're going with like cold tea today.
Oh my goodness, yeah, something cold and juicy.
It's got to be. And actually, I have a little guest who's going to be hanging out with me a little bit today because she's decided she wants to spend some time. So.
Oh, we have a puppy. I always love when animals join the show.
So we have a puppy who heard me talking, and now Lou wants to join us. So Lou's going to be joining me in some of the conversation here.
Well, Shane, before we get started with all of the good work that you've been doing, let's get to know who you were as a little guy and who you are now.
Wow. At 50, I'll be 52 coming up here. So it is hard to think about the young me. It's easiest to frame. I think my journey is very much about oppositional defiance. I feel like if they had told someone or there had been a discussion about oppositional defiance disorder as a young person, that would be me. And so I know early on, I actually love, strangely, I think oppositional defiance disorder, which, for many people, you can kind of frame as like asking questions and sort of questioning authority and all of that. I'm here for it. I think like any other sort of skill set, it helps to have some ways to manage that. So I'm also ADHD and I love it. I realize that not everyone feels comfortable in having that experience, but I was always high energy. I was always interested in exploring things. And, to me, that part of ODD that is asking questions was always the thing. I was always asking the questions, always trying to do stuff. And I think it was like many young people get treated when that stuff shows up, a problem. I was definitely the person who I was the person who was sent to the principal's office all the time, not for starting fights or anything else like that, but just because I was like, but like, why? Like, what is this thing we're doing? Or
you were that white kid.
But I mean, that curiosity is something that's really powerful. And so when I worked with high-risk youth and my partner and I were respite foster parents, so we at times are working with high-risk youth in that context, there's something beautiful about the curiosity that we have as young people. And I think it was a very sort of traumatic childhood, but I think one of the things that sort of came out of all of that was an embrace, sort of a recognition that I was never going to be like everybody. I think I struggled trying to be like everybody else, and it just wasn't ever going to work for me. I was like, but why? So I would just come back to that question over and over again. I'm like, yeah, I know we're like supposed to do this thing, but like, why? And I think the part that I have really learned to lean into as an activist and in the work that we do that grows out of that is just that curiosity is a beautiful thing. We want to stoke curiosity. We want to be interested. We want to hear something. And, again, we want to accept stories as people share them, and that's great. But when we look at systemic stories, when we look at ways and systems that are making decisions for us, oftentimes not alongside us or with us, I think asking questions is a great thing. I think it's something we should be doing, and maybe the answers aren't always the best, but at least we're going in with more transparency about what that means and what we're agreeing to or what we need to navigate in that, rather than just simply accepting it is the way it is. Because I think that passivity is actually, one of the things that causes us the most harm over time. And I think it benefits most people who hold the most amount of power. And so for me as a young person, I was certainly trouble. I think I always refer to myself. I love, John Lewis informed us about good trouble and gave us an idea of that language around what it meant in the civil rights movement. And as a queer person, I've always embraced the liberation and the magic possible, really talking about making that kind of good trouble, that we should be embracing dissent as constructive, right? There is destructive processes, but there's constructive dissent, and really embracing opportunities to have that, because that is how we create multiplicity. It is how we move towards something that is different than it is now, because we have yet to fulfill the promise of what's possible. So we need people to be like, but do we need to do it that way? Is this the only way to do it? So I think my genesis, overachiever for sure, like definitely what they call best little boy syndrome in queer people is like, I needed to get 4.0s and I needed to do all the things, but I was doing all the things because I was like, I want to explore. And that makes up so much of, I think, my narrative throughout my career, and continuing to just take on new challenges in ways that I find exciting.
You're my cup of tea, Shane, because I'm that person, right? Why do we have to do it that way? Why can't we just do different? Why do we always have to follow the crowd? Can we not just do something that nobody else is doing? I was a why kid growing up too, and everybody would you stop with the why? But why? I don't know how many times my aunts and uncles used to tell me, would you stop with that freaking word? Why? Like, why? Why can't we do that? Why can't we go play on that? You're going to break your arm. Oh, but why?
Well, and I wanted to find answers. I really enjoyed that part of learning. And to me, as an adult, I've really grown into, like, when I'm given my free time, I like to go explore. Travel is really important to me, because I like to go and sort of lose myself and get lost and talk to local people in different areas. I realize I will never be like a local. I'm still a visitor. Like, I recognize, I think one of the things you learn about privilege very early on in conversations about privilege is you can't ever separate yourself from that experience. And there is that being a guest in a space, being someone who may come from a nation with more resources, going to another nation, you have to always recognize, like, there's a different relationship you're going to have to community members. But if you give yourself space to listen, if you start to really, again, try to put yourself in positions and spaces where you are as grounded as you can be within those spaces, you just get to learn things and you get to hear different experiences, you get to explore. And so to me, that has been a guiding light through most of my existence, I would say. Again, much to the frustration of people, because I'm like, but why? Like, I do this, but why? Like, why don't I do that?
Well, and that's what I get from tea time, right? Because I learned from all the different types of teas out there. And everybody's like, oh, well, what beverage do you like? I don't like beverages. I like people. I like people's tea. Like, I just like what they serve, what they bring to the table. Like, I don't have to like a beverage. I do have a beverage, guys, but but Miss Liz does different beverage. You don't ever know what's in my cup, guys. But I do have a cup, and I do serve everybody that comes to the table. Shane, we have some comments and questions here for you, so I'd like to get those out to you before we lose track about what's in the cup here. We have a comment here from Gerald, I hope I'm saying it right. Excited to learn from your experience helping organizations build trust and connection. We have one from Yomolo. Shane, after 20 years of experience, what inspired you to focus so deeply on advocacy and empathy?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for sharing that. That's it really comes down to, so I was raised in the Midwest. So I was raised in rural Illinois, and I come from a family that I would consider, and it would be considered very unstable. A lot of different traumas. My mother passed away at 11, when I was 11, from cancer, but that was prior to divorces. In the household, there were alcoholism, there was violence, lots of things that I don't want to trigger anybody that were part of those experiences. What actually really sort of curbed me to the path of advocacy was an amazing individual. Her name was Patty Alzader. And she worked with Planned Parenthood. So at 14, I had started to volunteer with Planned Parenthood for a period of time. They were looking for some young people. Now, I had not been, I would say, active prior to that, but I lived in rural Illinois. And in rural Illinois, I was already helping raise my stepsister's kid when she had her first kid at 15. It was not uncommon in our communities for there to be young people who would have children. And I learned early on, again, coming back to the why, I kept coming back to, but why? Not that there's again, I'm a firm believer of bodily autonomy. And so all that is to come back to the conversation, what the Planned Parenthood experience did was open for me the door to bodily autonomy conversations, because I didn't understand at that time, and I got to learn over a long period of time, how people come to make choices. And so working for that as a 14-year-old, talking to other young people who were in some cases choosing, to have sex, and some young people who were really not necessarily choosing. I won't say that they were, there's a difference between sexual assault and IPV and intimate partner violence and just sort of being compelled to or pressured to. And many of the individuals in our community, that was a problem more about pressure than anything else. It was more about that peer pressure. And so I was like, well, if they have more information and more opportunities to decide, then, even if they do or don't, that's up to them. But at least they would have the information on the table in front of them and they could make better choices. Because the one thing I kept hearing from young people, my peers at the time, was like, I didn't know, sex ed was already terrible, all this different stuff. And it was like, well, what if we had more information to make better decisions? And by better decisions, again, does not mean the decisions we're making for you. It means that you feel more informed in the decisions you are making about your body, about who you are and who you want to be. And to me, that was a beautiful sentiment. And Patty was very much built into that model, which we would eventually call a harm reduction model. And for those who may or may not be familiar with harm reduction is saying, look, I'm not here to judge your behavior. You do what you need to do. My job, my goal is to make sure that when you're making those choices, you have the most information possible and that you are in the best position possible to be making those choices. In other words, if you're hungry, if you are low resourced and you feel the need to make decisions that are going to put you in harm's way, one thing that we can do as a community is make sure that you are in a better space on shelter, on food, on security, on safety. And then if you still decide to make these choices, then make these choices. And hopefully we're doing things like needle exchange, for example, is a harm reduction model, in that if you are going to choose to be a substance user, then if all of these other things are in place and you choose to be a substance user, then we just want to make sure that whatever substances you're using, you are doing the least amount of harm. And by that meaning, in terms of having clean needles or making sure that you have other safety mechanisms in case of overdose, for example, naloxone, and the amazing opportunity that provides for reducing overdoses. But harm reduction says, look, we're not here to judge you as a person making a consenting decision about your own body. But we also recognize society does not necessarily give you all the tools that are available to make those decisions. And oftentimes you are not always in positions where you may feel comfortable making the decision that you want to make. And so again, when we talk about things like Planned Parenthood and other areas around that kind of health, it's really creating more educational opportunities for people to know more, for young people to know more about their bodies, knowing about when is the right time for them if they want to consent and how they want to consent, all of those things being in play. So at 14, which is very young, before again, I'd even had any sort of activity in that context, I knew what it meant for people who just felt like they could not make decisions based on their own, on what they wanted. And so it was very influential to me about an empathy that, like, again, as a cis male, men are not often encouraged to think about that conversation. And that was, again, very eye-opening in that way, to be like, well, we are an incredible part of that conversation because we oftentimes are the people committing violence. We are the people who are causing that pressure. We are the people who are doing all of that. And so how are we not being more attentive, more engaged, more empathetic in that process? So that, again, people should be able to fulfill and thrive in their own bodies on their terms in those decisions. And that really started me on that trajectory of actually not even 20 years. It's actually almost 30 years now, because at 52, I started at 14. So we're talking about more like 35 years plus of really spending time in harm reduction work. And that has really guided me through all the parts of my journey, from reproductive justice to HIV prevention and queer liberation, as well as other parts of harm reduction work that really extend out to, again, all the freedoms that people should be able to enjoy of their own body and their own consent.
Well, we have some more questions coming in, and then I have some questions for you as well, Shane, that I want to get out to you. Hello from the live chat. Can't wait to hear how empathy can create stronger organizations. How can empathy create stronger organizations, Shane?
I'll be a little more short-winded in this answer because that was a joke. That was fun to talk about.
We're having fun. We got an hour.
I mean, empathy is essential. So we specialize in community-led solutions, and we focus on the community-led because it is so important that the decisions that are being made in communities for community work and organizational work actually stem from and alongside and with and in partnership with individuals who are accessing those services. Like, it is utterly, it is a historical model that everything is done for. And really, that it's hard to think of that as an empathetic model, because in some ways it's more of a pity model, right? It is that these people have a different experience than me, and I feel like they deserve this thing that I have, and I feel bad about it. But the problem with that is it oftentimes doesn't lead to systemic change. It oftentimes is really limiting in the sense of you're really focused solely on continuing to go back, and for the communities that are receiving those services, for the communities oftentimes at the subject matter there, they're having to perform that trauma over and over and over again in order to get this audience that is essentially has more resources or has more power to feel bad enough for them. And an empathy process is very different because what it does, it focuses on building advocates. What you want is your advocates to not think of themselves as donors, also not to think of themselves as people who receive services. What you want is a group of advocates who realize that this mission, this work in this community is there because we all benefit from this system. We all want to see these things change. We all want to see this transformation happen. And so we're willing to be there. So if I'm accessing services, I might someday be a donor, or I might be a board member, or I might be a staff member. And so it really takes out this idea that what you're doing is for, but you're doing it alongside. And the same for people who are donors, the same people who are, volunteers. They may find themselves in a position because life is complicated, and they may find themselves in a position where they need these same services. And so what we want to do is create a space that is much more flat when it comes to those power dynamics, and where empathy is really powering that work, that vision of that, what you want to create that's transformative. And so empathy works for organizations on a practical level because it actually expands and broadens a pool to have a shared vision of what's possible. And they get to bring and invest in that organization's work, in that transformative work, so that when that organization is running into challenges, whether that be policy challenges or friction from that, or just resourcing or other challenges, that you have more people in the room, more people interested to see that work succeed, right? So in the end, they end up being longer standing because they're able to build on more community effort. And oftentimes they can grow and have more financial stability within that too, because they're not just looking at, again, a transactional model of just write me a check for $2,000 and I'll forget that these people exist. I mean, they'll accept the $2,000. Everybody needs resources. That's a reality.
Absolutely. But I feel like in today's society, we need people over profit first to build that relationship, right? And then the profit will come. I say this all the time. Get to know and build a relationship with someone and then dig into their pockets. Because if you're just saying, gimme, people are going to be turned off. We're lacking empathy in a lot of things. And I'm glad that you're talking about this. We have a question here for you, Shane. It is, do you think trust is the most important foundation of leadership?
Oh, that's a great question. John Yuhasai, thank you for sharing that. That is a great question. Is it the most important foundation of leadership? I would say trust and credibility are critical because they allow you the opportunity to build and have people invest in a way that feels genuine and authentic, right? Like when we don't trust where these sources are coming from, then we do think of it more transactionally. Oftentimes we feel like, all right, do I feel like this organization is going to do responsibly the work that I would expect them to do with the investment I'm making? And again, that investment may be funds, but it also can be your volunteer effort. It also can be your word of mouth, right? All of these things are capital that work to help build an organization. And so trust, when we talk about with this organizations, we often talk about it from a context of credibility as well. So I feel like those two kind of go hand in hand in the sense that trust is to me, this idea that you're going to make good on your word and that I'm going to put that faith in that. And credibility says, I have a record of doing this, that you can see over time that I have built these relationships because they're meaningful, right? And that credibility to me is actually harder to build than trust. Some people are very trusting out the gate. Some people are willing to say, hey, look, you say you're coming in and you're working on housing and I want to believe you. I want to believe you because I want to believe this mission is true. And so they're going to trust you to do that. But oftentimes that gets met with disappointment. And I'll use an example. In the current climate here in the States, we saw many organizations come to the table to talk about justice issues, and they wanted us to trust them, right? They wanted us to, either they were flying their Black Lives Matter, black squares on their events, or they were holding their pride flags, or they were talking about pay equity for women. And then when push came to shove, they were not there. And so to me, like a lot of people wanted to trust that they were there. And, there are brands that have suffered that in part because they lost not just that trust, but it was that credibility. Whereas I think the organizations that have held to those models, who have recognized that these things are important and they are finding their pathways. Again, there are a lot of different pathways for people to do that. They're maintaining that credibility. with their audiences and alongside and in communication with those audiences, in spite of having to navigate and change the languages that they have to use in order to not get the ire of the US federal government at this current moment, and make sure that they are able to sustain over periods of time. So I think trust, to me, it gets matched with credibility in a way that needs to matter. So credibility to me is that like long-term proving of that trust is valid. But I think it's a great question around leadership.
I always say character over reputation as well, because people can say that they got the biggest reputation out there, that they're well known, but their character really sucks. And that kind of goes into the credibility of a person.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Miss Liz, because so coming up soon, I'll have a second TED Talk, TEDx talk that's going to come out. And the second TEDx talk is really talking about values conflict. Because part of it is how do we navigate these moments? Because sometimes that losing of that trust, right, and that the sort of loss of that credibility stems because people are in conflict about, well, how do I respond in this world? I need to make sure. You were talking earlier about how people over profit. I say you kind of have to have a little bit of both, and it's been a hard road.
Yeah, you have to have that switch, right? Because for certain, it's like a coin, right? It's heads or tails.
Well, I'd like to think that they work a little bit in I don't want them to be so oppositional. And I say this, it took me a long time to come around to capitalism in any constructive way. Like I always, I've been an activist and an organizer for a long period of time. I've worked for corporate America. So again, it's not like I'm afraid to work in these spaces, but I've always had a critique of it. I've always been frustrated by it. Eventually, I've sort of come around to a conscious capitalism model, not because I think capitalism is the best model. It is right now the most sustainable model in the world we live in at this time, at the scale at which we're in. I would love to envision a world where there are other models at play, and perhaps there are. But the reality of most people, especially people who need to depend on resources in the current moment for their security, for their safety, for their food, this is the model we got right now. We're gonna have to make some changes as we go, but that's what we've got. And so I think part of the challenge is that in talking about value systems, we end up losing. There has to be a pragmatic solution in there that does sustain. This is why in this current moment, as organizations are having to navigate changes of language, changes of things, that we can't lose sight that they need to sustain. They need to be able to provide those services. And the principles that are there, this is where those conflicts come in. And it's a really challenging place. For example, if you're particularly serving a community that is being targeted by the federal government, you're at a really difficult point where do you change, right, the language that you use around your communities, the communities that you serve, or do you start to think about, well, what other funding channels can I get to? Or what is my phasing out of funding that would, pull me away from the restrictions and the harms that are being done at the federal level and start to allow me more opportunities to work with foundations and local municipal governments, whatever, in order to make sure that this community stays housed, that this community gets access to healthcare. All of these things that need to happen because communities themselves are part of that decision making. And if they are part of that decision making, you're able to navigate that language in a much more meaningful way and start to phase that process out so that you're not as close to or dependent on systems that essentially are at this point causing harm.
Yeah, absolutely, right? We got two more questions here, and then I want to talk about a great ideal. I want to get that out there. Shane, what was one defining moment that shaped your leadership philosophy?
Wow, that's a great question. These are great questions. I appreciate all of you. These are really really powerful ones. I'll be honest. It's hard to say one defining moment. I think working for other people certainly impacted my leadership philosophies. I think I've worked for people who never worked for another person, and then I've worked for people who have worked their way through varying parts of the tiers of the environment. And undoubtedly, I have learned the most what not to do from the people who escalated and elevated very quickly without working in collaboration with other people. And then I have learned more to-dos from individuals who have worked their way through these processes because they also recognize what it's like to receive direction, to welcome dissent, and to move through essentially an environment where you want to foster multiplicity of ideas. And to me, that is the thing that I'm most interested in. It's the thing that I personally am interested in. And when you look at statistics and you look at leadership processes and the communities that thrive, have the most innovation, they also are ones that embrace that multiplicity. They recognize and honor and treat with dignity people throughout all the striations of an organization. And so I would say the thing that taught me the most were the two individuals that I worked for who essentially had a great idea, not a great idea in my company, but had an innovative moment, moved very quickly up the rank, and then just could not process what it meant to handle dissent and continuing to foster innovation among team. They were too busy being right. And eventually it sunk those companies. One was monster.com. I worked for them for a time. And so that was a really meaningful, because I was working with them at the top of their game, and they tried to do a lot of things that were not what they should have been doing well. And so competition came on and just ate their lunch. And that had a lot to do with the way that organization was structured.
Well, Shane, we have a question here from Nick, and is, as a TEDx speaker and podcast host, what lessons has surprised you the most over the years?
What lesson? Oh, that's a toughie. I'm trying to think what that would be. What's the lesson that has surprised me most over the years? I'm trying to think of ones. So in terms of ones that I have witnessed on stages, I would say, there's some lessons, again, like I'm a big TED fan, so I'm always excited about places where innovative ideas and ideas we're sharing are there. So some of them that really stick out for me. I think there was a beautiful one around hospice care that was just really a beautiful way for people to think about their end of life and what that means. And so I think witnessing that from the sidelines of a stage was really beautiful. I witnessed that one when that speaker spoke in Greensboro, and really talking about what it meant, and also the racial justice issues that really hinder communities from having constructive conversations about what end of life care means, and really beginning to think about legacies and long-term processes. So that was, again, I thought was really insightful, and a great way to think about how we even approach existing resources and making sure that we're using a lens of equity within those conversations all the way through people's lives. For me personally, as what did I see that I was like, oh, or what did I experience that I was like, oh, well, that's a thing. Clearly not short answers. I really wish I would. I really need pithy answers. There's so many things in this world that are so exciting to think about, and that is one that I need to learn. So that is one I think I always admire. We recently interviewed Dimitri Daskalauskas. If you're not familiar with him, up in Canada, you might not know him, but he's in the U.S. He headed up the HIV services for the CDC, and he's a very famous New York medical expert. And he's just an incredibly personable and dynamic person and speaker and leader. Also throws out a lot of thirst traps on the internet. So just a nice little nuance to his career. So you go, Dr. Dimitri. And what I think I was most surprised by and amazed by is the practice with which he was able to navigate the parts of his history and really bring those forward. As a speaker, as a leader, something I am working on clearly to get better at is how to condense those and synthesize them in really condensed, poignant moments. So that from a skills standpoint, from a content standpoint, I think it really reframed my sense around justice through the entirety of life in a way that I had not thought of before. I think that was really compelling for me.
Well, before we get into a great idea, we're going to get into your tea, because my listener, Kyle, he says, trust, engagement, and empowerment. That is the tea that you gave me. So tell me why you gave me those three words, Shane.
Well, because I think, trust, engagement, and empowerment are all really key components. I think, as someone asked earlier about trust is really important. It is a key component. I do believe it has to be earned. I think it is something, again, that's why I tied it with credibility, and we talked about that earlier. And engagement means I want people to be active. I think I want, everybody here who's listening to think about the ways they engage in the world. So the ways that they are participating in their communities, again, depending on what resources and time and availability you have, you can do that by word of mouth and simply being supportive. You can do that by being a donor. You can do that by volunteering on your local commissions and other places. But we need to be engaged. I think what we're seeing as a society set globally is a tapping out in communities where there are a lot of resources. And we've really yielded a lot of power to people who are making decisions that fundamentally work against everybody. And so if all we do is sort of, yield to distraction and yield away from really speaking into the moments, and for those of us who have privilege, making sure that we are using that social capital constructively, then we're really not making the world a better place at the end of the day. I don't believe the world has achieved the greatness that's possible. I've never lived in a world that was equitable. I've never lived in a world where women receive the same equal pay for the equal amount of work, where people of different nationalities are treated with dignity, where communities of color have access to the same resources and materials and opportunities to thrive. All of these things, I've not lived in that world yet. I would love to. It is a world that I fight for, and I may not in my lifetime have that. But if I don't express my social capital, if I'm not engaged, then to me, that is just something that is not part. I don't want my story to be not participating in this world. And then empowerment is really how we think about that capital. How are we, rather than using our capital only for us, which is something we need to do. I want to make sure everyone on this who hears it, that you are safe, that you are in a space where you have food, resources, stability, good health, all of these things, that those are all things are all there. But then how are we also looking at our other communities who may not have those same accesses and really walking alongside them? How are we spending time learning alongside them? And then how are we using that capital and those resources in such ways as to enact that change? So again, that engagement to me is really important, but empowerment is also beginning to think about, well, how am I applying that?
And that's what I mean. I serve strong tea. Like, you guys bring the strong tea to the table, and there's reasons why people use words to express themselves, right? And serve themselves. And a lot of people are like, Miss Liz, where's the tea? The tea is within us. It's how we bring our service to the table. And like you said, Shane, we live in a world that is not full of peace, but we have to be the example to try and get that peace. If we don't stand up and ask for that change, we're not going to make the change either. Shane, let's talk about how you got inspired to create a great ideal.
So a great idea is a firm we've spent over 10 years working with purpose-driven organizations and companies from around the country. We have worked a little bit adjacently with some Canadian organizations, but primarily here in the U.S. And we work in everywhere from education and healthcare and for-profit areas. We work in partnership with them, and then in nonprofit areas from climate mitigation, reproductive justice, LGBT rights, HIV care, senior care. So all across the gamut, any place that's kind of justice oriented. And those who are, understand our value systems, you can see our value systems on our site at agreatidea.com/values. If they align in those ways, they are a great partner for us, and we want to see that work succeed, because they also have a version of the world that we would like to help fulfill. And we do that through strategy. We do that through essentially design and content development. And so we do that through whether it's websites or, brand marks, printed pieces, events, all the things, all the sort of operations that need to make sure the messages get out there to advocates and invite people into the mix. We do all of that. And then we have things like deployment, where we have ongoing strategies like an email, social media, other places where we have an ongoing communication process, and make sure that, again, our advocates are connected to and engaged in that work. And so that's what a great idea does. Its genesis really comes from, like many people, panic. So as you go out on your own. So I've been obviously doing this work for a very long time. I was an organizer for many, many years. My area of harm reduction specialty is actually in sex work decriminalization. Although that intersects in places like racial justice, trans rights, HIV prevention, other areas like that around healthcare. And so I've been in those spaces for a very, very long time, 20 plus years running the only program for men in the nation. And then, like I said, working in areas like HIV and queer liberation for many, many years prior to that. And so I found myself in a position where I was like, well, what do I do? What do I do next? And it was really exciting because it was an opportunity to connect to more organizations and be able to do full time what I'd already been doing on the side when I was working for organizations like I mentioned Monster, and there are many other companies that I worked with over the years. And I was able to bring, able to bring skills to that work. Some of that work I really loved. Some of that work was like a paycheck, so I could go do other things. And now I get to just do really great stuff all the time. I get to policy days, for example. We just recently had a policy day for Planned Parenthood in New York. That was a really great day. We had an HIV policy day here in North Carolina. So those kind of live events are always great because you bring people together. And sometimes we're doing galas. We just did a video for an organization in New York that'll be in the subway systems. We're about to finish up a report on AI and really looking at the damage that AI centers are doing to communities of color in the South. Those are all really like every day I get to work with organizations to create, whether printed or digital, something really powerful that connects to other people.
So Shane, what's the difference between branding and content?
So branding, good question. That's a great question. So branding is really the identity itself. Right. So it's saying, hey, look, I'm an organization that may provide housing. And so I need a name. I need a name that's going to be memorable. So that's an obvious thing, right? The name and the logo and the mark. But it's also the story behind the name, right? It's making sure like that organization's genesis, that organization's value systems, those are all part of that brand system that make up essentially how you think about that organization and the way that organization plays a role in your life and the life of those you care about and your neighbors and the people around you. That's the brand piece. That's the brand identity piece. Content is the way in which we deliver that message and reinforce that message. And I like to think also create two-way systems so that we can also hear back on that message. Again, working alongside communities, community-led work means making sure you're creating two-way systems so that your community can respond back to you, can help course correct. That is one of the most beautiful things that I've seen in organizations that are doing well, is that they open the door. Someone from the community says, hey, this language may not speak to me in this way, or I feel like I'm really disconnected from this in this way. And then that organization listens, right? And is able to spend some time really thinking about, well, okay, let's make sure we're paying attention to and walking alongside our communities in meaningful ways. And we're doing that every day. And that means that your advocates really do care what happens to you. They are there. They are going to spend that time with you. And that authenticity, that meaningful engagement, that is what is so powerful about content. Content is just the really strategic structuring to make sure you're doing that work and that you're creating those loops to get that content feedback that you need.
So when you're looking at an influencer and they're putting their content out, what are you thinking, Shane, when you're looking at their pages and that in today's world?
If it's an influencer who's got a particular motivation, like, you get, there's some influencers who are great talking about, for example, humanism. They may talk about a pivoting from a faith participation to a humanist. They've got a particular direction that they want to go. And if they're doing their influencing work right, their audience is connected to them. I think that's what's great about it. I think when we look at influencers that we want to partner with or that we want to connect with, I think you're looking for that narrative overlap in that content. How are they reflecting the communities that you are looking to be engaged with in a meaningful way? And can you do that connection in a way that feels authentic? It's interesting because watching influencer culture and the influencer economy build up, what that looks like in that one's job to just be an influencer is to just be out there and say things. That's interesting. I'd like to think that there's even more to it, that maybe we're witnessing and walking alongside them, and that influence that they're having is helping us be better people. So that would be good. But capitalism. So that isn't necessarily how it goes. Like, it's to encourage purchasing or things that they may not even want or like, but simply get paid placement for. So there's a reason to be cautious about any economy like that. It doesn't mean it can't be used for good. It can't mean it can't be used for playful distraction. If you want to just learn how to play a video game, you can watch an influencer who will show you how to play that video game. That's great. I think where it gets a little sort of uncertain for me is just around the idea of whether they are trying to provoke a response that isn't natural, that isn't connected to people's experiences, for a motive that actually may do harm over time. So it is an industry that has,
it's got its mixed emotions, right? Because there's it's pros and cons of everything in life, right?
Yeah.
And the influencers out there, there are many great influencers out there, but there are some that are, it's almost like they're targeting for a negative reaction, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Did you see
And-
the documentary on it was the one on, it was HBO or Netflix or one of them, around the manosphere, right?
yes.
The elevation of that. So I think these are new spaces, and I think I want to give us all grace, because we are learning to navigate these new spaces and new economies. Same with AI. I just had a conversation about AI for Power Bound Pride. We're going to have somebody on who's just phenomenal, who sits on the board of Change Agent AI, talking about AI's role, because I have a lot of cautions around it. Obviously, like everyone else, I have to use it because it's in our programs now. We're kind of compelled to, but I think there's real reasons for us to have cultural conversations about what, not only the information that we're going to get, but whose motivations behind that information we're going to get, and then what our reliance is on the problem-solving skills in order to secure information and validate multiple sources is, and what that means. Like all of these things, and there's a couple things that I think are also pretty relevant there too. But I think Europe is having a great conversation about that. They are much more cautious than certainly the US has been in this conversation. And I'm watching them to sort of gauge even my own response. We, for example, have an AI policy, and we put that out. Not many agencies have one. We put one out because we can't not, unfortunately, the applications we use to design things, to write things, whether it's, Word or Google Doc, whatever, we're in it because we don't have a choice. Like if we put a question, we're getting AI. And so we wanted to at least put out something that said, hey, we are really considering our decisions when we're applying AI. We're really trying to think about how we use it and do it as much meaningful alignment with our values as we can. But that to me is, again, an example of the way that influencer culture is still something that's new in the way that it is formed today. Influencers are nothing new. I mean, that's from, what is it? Jack Lalonde, or I forget the Make Friends with Powerful People book or whatever it is. Like, we've had these influencers in self-help. Oprah, love Oprah, obviously the model of an influencer in many ways. But now we have people who are accelerating to an influencer status and may or may not have a motivation or maybe practice with the responsibility that holds.
Well, you mentioned something, Shane, problem solving, with the AI. The AI is meant to make errors just like humans, because they want you to see if you're going to do the problem solving. Like they still want us to stay in touch. And a lot of people are losing the detachment with the AI because they're just like, no, AI can do all the work for me and it'll get done. But they're making errors on purpose to see if you're paying attention. It's to keep us keeping attention to it. Like even when you're making graphics or posters or that, and I use AI for some of my stuff as well. And I look at it and I say, no, we're not doing that. We're not altering that part of the image. We're altering this part of the image, or we're altering that part of the message. Dig deeper. You have to have that conversation back and forth. It's like a conversation like we're having right now between you and me, Shane. I always tell people, think deeper, look deeper. AI is there to make us work.
That's interesting. I have not heard. That's an insight that I've not, or a perspective I've not really heard about AI's intentionality, because that's interesting about an intentionality to make mistakes. What I'll say is, AI is based on an algorithm of logics, right?
Yep.
And a lot of the critique, or some of the critique that lives in AI, is to recognize that we live in a white supremacist world. We live in a world that is deeply misogynist. We live in a world that is deeply racist. It is going to replicate all of that, no matter its intentions, no matter who's there typing in, even for community members of color, or again, queer community members. It's still going to replicate what we know and all that we know, not what we want to build, not the version of the future that we want to have, but that version of the world. Now it's interesting about the mistakes, because I find it interesting, because for you, the rationale is they want to encourage you to challenge them, or is there? So can you parse that out a little bit more for me? Because I would love to understand a little bit better.
I think it's to keep us engaged, right? That they want to see if we're actually working with them. Because if we just accept what they're sending to us and saying, this is the way it's going to be, then it shuts down that communication, right? And the AI is looking for communication. It's looking for prompts. Like that's what AI is all about, is putting prompts in, right? But if we just say, okay, this is fine. Yeah, that looks good. They got no prompt. They got nothing to work with. It's just like human beings. We have nothing to work with. If you come to the table and say, no, that's all fine. That's good. Okay, so there's no improvement here. There's nothing to work with.
So what is it? Is its goal, do you think, to try to get more human in its nuances?
I think it's to pick our brains, right? We're picking their brains, so why not pick our brains? Like it's a back and forth kind of thing. It's kind of like a relationship. There's relationships with everything, right? Even the robot wants a relationship. There was a movie back in the 80s, early 80s, where this guy rented a robot or something, this doll, and she was a robot. I can't remember the name of it. I'm trying to remember it. If any of my listeners know the name of it. And he rented this female robot as a date, as a partner. And they got to know each other because they had that communication back and forth.
Interesting. No, we'll have to pick that up. I have to think about that and whether it is. I mean, I'm then going to problematize it and go all Philip K. Dick on you and go.
You're coming at me.
Is it like, what is the motivation to be better for us or to be better for the control of us?
There's a bit of both.
So I will, and I know that's a conversation probably we could pick up another time, but I think that's because I did see somebody had a question before we wrap up. I know we're getting close to time, right?
Yeah, we're getting close to the time, and I go down these rabbit holes, guys. But I want people and my listeners to understand that AI is not there to scare us. It's there to welcome us. It's there to engage with us. It's just like the new cereal that comes out or the new pop that comes out. It's something that wants us to try it, not to be afraid of it. There's so much fear with AI that I don't understand why the fear is there. And I don't know if it's because we're stuck in our old ways or stuck in the comfort zone that we don't want to see new.
So what I'll say to that, and I think I mean, my fear, so I'll share my fear, which is maybe you've heard this, maybe you haven't. My fear is the reliance on an information source that, with or without my consent, knows more about me than it might need to, can shape a message across multiple forms because we become reliant on the same systems. And those systems are controlled by people who may or may not want me to thrive on my own terms, depending on what profit motive it has for them. So there are some key questions about what it is to get. So you take the printing press or you take the cotton gin. You buy a cotton gin in one place, you use a cotton gin multiple places. Again, important instruments, important devices that were, technologies that were invented and changed the course of the American, how US of me to say that.
I'm a Canadian. For you.
Well, but also just like America's the center of everything. So we're not. I'm not pretending that it changes the course of humanity on both counts, right? However, right, if I use a cotton gin in one state, I use it in another province, it's the same. If I read a newspaper in New York and I read it in Ottawa, it is the same, right? Now, again, my responses, my placement, my background might change the way I read the same story, but I'm reading the same story. What happens in an environment when that story changes because it knows who I am and it shifts language in there to change my response because it knows exactly how I'm going to respond from there on, so that we may read the same story, but we're no longer getting the same outcome and we're no longer getting the same facts, because already we're seeing a sort of what it means to have fact divisiveness in America, right? Like America is literally the portrait of that. I'm sure Canadians are looking at us going, how silly. But if you talk to people who have those divisions, you start to understand that their version of the truth, their version of the facts are very different. So what happens when that factual base is fundamentally controlled by people who want a particular outcome?
But that's kind of like a relationship, Shane.
It is, but on a much larger Orwellian kind of scale.
But
Like,
it's almost like a relationship, right? When somebody gets to know you really well, when you're in a long relationship, long-term relationship, they know you and they know the outcome that's coming, right? They know the response you're going to get. That's
sure, but
like
they also know
AI
how to
getting to
sedate
know
you.
us.
They know how to appease you, and they know what information to leave out. And so it's really important to note that we won't have a universal shared set of information. We won't have a universal shared set of things. And that is a concern I have going into the AI environment, because as we remove printed pieces, as we remove sort of a fixed story, right, that will change how we see the world. And I think we need to talk about what that means. Because again, not only replicating biases and oppressions that have long existed, but also that the people who are doing this certainly want us sedated, certainly want us to be good consumers, want us to be all these things. So where's the role of dissent if everybody's placated?
Absolutely. You know, this is a conversation me and you're going to have like after the show.
Bring it, I said. Bring it.
We have a couple questions that I want to get out to you, and then I need your final message to everybody out there. Let's get Francis's first. From leaders who are just beginning their journey, what should their start if they want to create a more human-centered culture?
Oh, I love that, actually. We put on our site, you can go to greatidea.com/insights. There's a brand advocacy roadmap that is worth not a roadmap, sorry. There's a map in there. And what it does is it actually talks about the way that you do your brand story, but it starts to break out across all the communities that themselves are impacted by that brand story, all the way to essentially the neighbors in your community who are impacted by your organization. Again, people who may not directly access services, people who may not be staff or your board, but they may be serving at local restaurants, or they may be at the same congregation as some of your members. And really starting to think about a human-centered, meaning like, how are all these people building your brand story? How are they building that experience that you're building as an organizational culture, right? Because oftentimes we're just really focused on that direct relationship, which is important, but it's not the only one. You have internal stakeholders, you have external stakeholders, and then you have really people, who you may not think of as directly invested, but the person who, sells your tea and coffee outside the thing, they're invested in your program in a different way. And they talk about your program in a particular way. And knowing those things, start to realize that you are having a human interaction all the time as your brand is building. So that's how your brand can do it. So I hope that answers your question from that side. But you can go to Insights and download that.
Next one is Brandon. Shane, have you seen a specific organization transform significantly after embracing empathy-driven leadership?
Brandon, that's a great question. Yes. And we saw that through a variety of things. One, we saw the power dynamics within the organization change to a far more constructive. We saw lower levels of turnover. We saw a diversification of the team. This is, again, something we see a lot in nonprofit organizations, is we don't tend to see a lot of diversification of team. We see a lot of intention. We see this in corporate structures as well. We see a lot of intentions, but we never see a lot of fulfillment. And that is because communities, whether they are coming in with disabilities, whether they are coming in from a marginalized faith, or whether they're coming in as a person of color, they are welcomed in because they represent a particular identity on the team, but never an actual recognition of what it means to be part of that community and that multiplicity. And organizations that have shifted to a much more empathy-focused structure, some overt and very transparent and difficult, hard conversations to have actually seen less turnover, more constructive results from their team members, and honestly, just a better reputation in the community as well.
And one from David: what role does resilience play when building trust during challenging times?
Resilience is really an interesting term. So, David, I don't have a full formed answer here, but it's interesting because resilience is something, in some ways, I think when we talk about communities who experience oppression all the time, they oftentimes are code switching and navigating resilience in really powerful and profound ways. What I think is kind of interesting to unpack a little bit is the way that people who will come more from positions of power may not have a lot of practice in that level of resilience. That actually the resilience weakness tends to be there than anywhere else. And so getting people who experience and have privileges at different levels, or may hold different power at different levels, starting to recognize that, and even when they start feeling that discomfort, to me, that discomfort is where so many things get undone, because everybody feels good as long as everybody's comfortable. But the reality is, if you're having a conversation about racial justice or injustice in different ways, and you are walking out of the room, say, for example, for me as a white cis guy, if I'm having a conversation about racial justice and I'm not coming out of it like uncomfortable at some level, then we're really not tapping into some really important things. Because I live in this, I don't live in a vacuum. I live in a white supremacist culture. I affirm it on a given daily basis, unintentionally in so many different ways. And when I'm held accountable, I do my best to respond to it. But, we live in this culture. We can't absolve ourselves of it. And that goes, again, just because I'm queer doesn't mean I don't live in a space that's homophobic or transphobic. It is important to me to be among community who hold me accountable. And that accountability is uncomfortable. And learning to practice that discomfort, learning to be in a space where that accountability can be constructive and helps everybody kind of move to a better space. That's what we need. So to me, a lot of communities that come in with have experienced depression, they oftentimes come in resilient because in many ways they've experienced discomfort and practiced it all the time because they're oftentimes in spaces where their perspective, their voices just are not given the same level in the room. But it is more resilience has to be practiced for community members who hold more power.
And we have one here from Brandon. Before we wrap up, what is one action every leader could take this week to strengthen human connection?
I think it's there's a few exercises that are out there. And one of the ones that I love the most is really thinking about, what does your inner circle look like as a leader? What does your inner circle look like? How diverse is your inner circle? And taking an opportunity to go meet and talk with someone who's outside that inner circle, who works on your team, who works in different spaces, and just take some time to learn about them and spend some time with them. Part of that is building that empathy, is building that just knowledge base, but is recognizing that your inner circle, and it could be among your friend group too, same thing. Studies have shown people's friends group are not that often diverse. So there's a number of worksheets and exercises you can do that. You can reach out to me and I can try to send you some if you want. But it's really good to know as a leader that sometimes we create these insular spaces ourselves, and to create something that does challenge ourselves and make ourselves accountable to build more human connections is to practice that empathy, is to be in spaces where you get to be wowed by people's experiences that you just didn't expect, or something that you might predict just isn't true in this case, or doesn't hold a lot of water there. Those are all things that I think help practice us be more intentional about our human interactions and our human engagement. So to me, one of the first things you can do is start to do a really good reflective exercise on who your inner circle is, who you're connected to, and start to think about the diversity and how you might test yourself a little bit by going outside of that. Go to an event that you've never been to before. Go to a different faith environment, or a celebration of faith or culture or something like that, and spend some time and really get to know people there is really good practice. But among your team, it's really thinking about, how am I really getting to know community members here? And am I really kind of keeping that circle pretty tight?
And before we wrap up, I want a final message from you, Shane, for all the listeners, but also talk about the upcoming book a little bit.
You bet. So the Advocacy Advantage is really built as a proactive book. Like I said, I'm not a businessy guy. I don't think of myself as a businessy guy. You can hear me I love talking about activism all day because I'm so passionate about it. And business is something that I came to because I was like, oh yeah, I run one now. What do I do with it? So I got my MBA and I'm learning is probably a better way to frame it. I'm always learning how to do better and do this work. What I have learned though, is that advocacy, meaningful advocacy-centric work, really does translate to better business. It translates to more stable business, and it actually makes our communities better. And so, part of the book is really just trying to say, hey, what are the ways we are building these relationships, that we are building across human lines, and making sure that we are connecting people to the value of what we're trying to do. And so the Advocacy Advantage has a lot of practical guidelines, exercises, pieces in there that you can go engage in and do. And there's a dashboard that's helpful to talk about how we measure that and look at metrics related to that advocacy work. And all of that is built into the book to help people who are like me, small to mid-sized businesses. I mean, enterprise companies certainly can benefit from it, but organizations, small to mid-sized businesses, the book is really for all of us, because all of the big lofty stuff, that's nice. But when you have a team of maybe 10, 5, 2, 20,
one,
these things are still relevant, because even as a single owner company, it's really thinking about, or single, one person company, it's really thinking about how you build those bridges, those networks, and how you build those connections. And the larger that footprint, the larger that place that you're connected to other people, the stronger and sturdier you become as a business, and the more impact you can have, especially if you're a mission-driven business.
So Shane, if you'd like to just leave a final message with everybody and spell out your website for all the audio listeners.
You bet. You can go to learn more about A Great Idea at agreatidea.com. That's agreatidea.com. And you can also learn more about me at shanelukas.com. So ShaneLukas.com. You can find out more there. You can go see my first TED Talk, which is about why businesses should hire people with sex work experience, in case that might be something that's very new to you. So you can go check out that TED Talk. That's pretty, hopefully it's a fun one, and certainly feel free to leave feedback there. And then you'll see my second TED Talk coming up sometime soon. You can get that again from both shanelukas.com, and then I'm sure greatidea.com will have that there too. As far as a message I want to leave everybody with, first of all, a big amount of gratitude. It's really important to me to share, not only to the audience, but to you, Miss Liz, the opportunity to be able to be here today with you, to connect with you, for you to share your insights and what you've learned over all this time, and just your energy and your joy just means so much to me. As far as what I want to share with people out there, what next steps in order to do, honestly, it is make room for your own discomfort and make room for your own dissent. It is a time where we're being asked to fall in line on many things, and fear will force a lot of us to do that. But it is a time where actual movement may be possible, simply because the reality is the world was never great. And I think that's a really important thing we have to come back to sometimes, is that our nostalgia is a beautiful thing. And we all have wonderful nostalgic memories. But it was never a time where queer people, where women, where indigenous communities, or First Nations communities, where every community felt it was an equitable and safe space for them to thrive in their own bodies and their own terms. And it does give us an opportunity now to think about what it is we want to build. And that's only possible when we think about dissent and how we want to build moving forward. So I think it's a good chance for us to do that reflection. And then, stand up where you can. We actually have, you can get on our site, you can actually get a list of different ways to dissent, be them interpersonal or personal, all the way from like reflective, all the way to public, depending on your level of comfort. So you can download those, that guide to dissent also from our site at agreatidea.com/insights. And I really encourage everyone out there to think about constructive dissent.
Well, thank you so much, Shane. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I love guests like you, where we can have a good conversation back and forth and understand and pick each other's brains, because that's what it's all about. Thank you to the listeners out there. You guys are my team. This is my team. The listeners, my guests, the viewers, the supporters. Thank you guys. I really encourage you guys all to check out these tea times. Check out Miss Liz. Miss Liz's Teatimes on YouTube. Check out Miss Liz's website at www.misslizsteatime.com. I'm just going to do a quick review of what today's tea time was, and I will be back next week, and we'll do this all over again. What an inspiring and deeply meaningful conversation today. Shane, thank you for bringing your honesty, wisdom, compassion, and leadership to the tea time table. Your work reminds us that empathy is not weakness in leadership. It is one of the greatest strengths. Today's conversation explored advocacy, trust, creativity, purpose-driven leadership, and the importance of building organizations and communities that generally care about people rather than simply performance metrics. One of the strongest takeaways from today is this: people remember how they were treated long after they forget what was said. Through your work, you continue helping organizations understand the lasting connection comes from authenticity, listening, compassion, and creating environments where people feel valued and heard. You also reminded listeners that advocacy is not only about speaking loudly. Sometimes advocacy is found in the consistent choice to show up with integrity, empathy, and courage. Here's some food for thought to leave with everyone today. What kind of world could we create if more leaders focused less on power and more on people? Because meaningful impact begins with humanity in place, back at the center of leadership. Thank you, Shane, for reminding us that purpose-driven work can create lasting change far beyond business itself. Until next time, keep leading with empathy, keep building bridges through advocacy, and keep serving real life tea one conversation at a time. And I'll see everybody next week, and we'll do this all over again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane.